Oops. There we are. All right, so make sure that I've got.
All right.
Yep. All right, we are officially live, yay! Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Soulfire. I am exceptionally excited to be here tonight with Liz Foye. We're going to be talking about working with plant medicine to transmute trauma. So before we get started, a couple of disclaimers. We are going to be talking about probably some sensitive subject matters tonight. So we are going to be having conversation focused around trauma. So this is just a reminder that self-care is obviously important. Be tender with yourself. And if you need to step away, this is being recorded, so you can always come back and rewatch it a later time. So just take care of yourself. That's the most important thing. Also, the subject matter tonight, we're going to be talking about plant medicine. And a majority of the plants that we'll probably be discussing are illegal in most states, except in certain circumstances. And I happen to be fortunate enough to live in the state of Kentucky, where plant medicine is, if used under the guise of a religious organization, there are some ways to get around the law in that way. It is legal in that atmosphere. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I would love to introduce my guest, Liz Foye. I'm so excited to have you here. Liz, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
It is so great to be here. Thank you so much. Man, I'm so excited to be sharing. I'm Liz Foye. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and I explore a lot. I explore the external world, the internal world. I own a massage therapy business that I started 10 years ago, and that transitioned into emotional healing and gone through a ton of different chapters. And right now, one of my biggest passions is being on my land with my chickens and my dogs. And until 2020, was traveling the world and experiencing different cultures. And I'm fortunate enough to still be able to do that, in other realms and dimensions a little bit. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm just passionate about exploring everything, diving deeper into everything.
That's amazing. That's so exciting. And well, we'll touch back into this at the as we're wrapping up too, but just a reminder for everybody that Liz's contact information is in the description. So if you are interested in reaching out to work with Liz, all of her contact information is there. So you can reach out and learn more about her services and all of the wonderful, wonderful work that she does. So yay. So talking about, and actually one last thing, as we go along, guys, if you have questions or comments, always please feel free and put those in the comment section. I think Liz and I are both actually monitoring the comment section, so we'll be keeping our eyes open and we'll be answering your questions as often as we can. So just feel free and pop those in there. So, plant medicine and trauma. I don't know, it's interesting. I'm very curious to hear your story of how you connected with plant medicine, because mine was like a total series of just complete accidents, just happened to be in the right place at the right time. It wasn't even something that was in my mind. I knew that I was dealing with depression and anxiety, and that was kind of my realm of awareness. I was very, very connected to spirit. I was diving into my intuition and my intuitive gifts, and it kind of, it's literally like spirit just kind of led me on this path. And it was such a blessing and a gift that I really have no explanation for. It was just kind of a happenstance kind of thing that changed my life. So I'm curious to know about how you came into, how you found plant medicine and your path there.
It's interesting. I've tried to piece different pieces together, and I have some blank spots. I have a vivid memory, must have been over 8 years ago, sitting in my office at the time and finding out about MAPS, a multidisciplinary approach for psychedelic studies.
Mm-hmm.
And I vividly remember sitting in my office, and somehow I stumbled upon that. I don't even honestly know how. And I was communicating with them about participating in a study, but it would mean that I had to essentially move to California for the study. And I didn't move forward with that because I had my mask on. Nobody knew exactly what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was many years later, and unfortunately more traumas later too, that I kind of stumbled into, how did I find the book? I read the book Acid Test.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I was just enamored. I needed to know more. It was specifically for PTSD. This book was about PTSD recovery, and it was a lot of veteran stories, and it was a lot of stories and easily digestible examples. And from there, I started just looking into it, and it's now been maybe, well, I guess, man, that was probably 10 years ago when I first discovered it. And it's been probably 5 years since I've really been working with plant medicine and psychedelics, and life is completely different.
Yeah. 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 It's amazing. My background, like I said, I knew I had intuitive gifts. And so I was kind of going down this path of trying to figure out what those were. And I had been struggling with complex PTSD, sometimes referred to as childhood PTSD, but I didn't know it at the time. I knew I had really crippling depression and extremely serious social anxiety. And was, it's funny because, I think for a lot of people that knew me over the years, that may be a little bit of a revelation, because I was able to, keep things kind of tamped down in a functioning package. I was very high functioning, but I was really, really struggling a lot. And so I was going down the route of, I was taking medication. I was in a very high stress job. I was taking medication for anxiety and sleep. Matter of fact, before I was living in Atlanta at the time, and before I left Atlanta, I was on, let me think about this, Effexor, at least a milligram of Xanax every day, and Ambien just to function. That was my baseline. It wasn't functioning well, but that was my baseline. And so I transitioned out of the job that I had in July of 2012 and lost my health insurance. And so therefore lost access to my medications, and was also driving across the country. I was moving to Los Angeles. So I got to detox off of all of those medications while I was driving across country. I do not recommend that ever to anybody. It was horrible. But I knew that it was something that I didn't want to experience again, but I still had the issue of my anxiety. I still at this point didn't know that I had complex PTSD, and just through a series of chances, wound up being invited. The business that I went to work for in Los Angeles, the woman there had met a shamanic practitioner from Peru, and had done some plant medicine journeys with him. I was petrified of doing anything psychedelic. But she invited me and a couple other people from work and a couple of her friends to come into the business after hours and do a plant medicine journey. And I had no idea what I was doing or why I was going. But something told me that I needed to be there, and it changed my life in so many ways. And I'm curious, because it's such an experience. There was no way for me to prepare for that experience. And it sounds like even going in, because you had read the books, and I don't know, growing up, I had tons of friends that, took acid and did mushrooms and all of these things, but I never experimented with that. So I didn't have any background going into it. So I don't know if you had some knowledge dipping your toes in the water before you went in, what, even with the books that you had read and as prepared as you were, what were some of the surprising things about your experience?
Oh my gosh. Well, the acid test book, and it's been years since I've read it, but it was a lot of like short stories and it didn't go as much into the process. It was more of like, they did this and here's the outcome. And it skipped a lot of the hard stuff. Mm-hmm. A lot of it, it's hard work. It's a hard journey. And I had experience using some substances recreationally previously. Mm-hmm. And looking back, it really amazes me that those weren't healing experiences, and that I'm really, really, really thankful that they weren't traumatic experiences either, because it's powerful medicine, and when used incorrectly, it's rough. Yeah. I had one instance when I wasn't meaning to use it therapeutically, and I had a therapeutic experience unexpectedly. Mm-hmm. But when I went into it, I put so much intention into it. Yeah. And I was really, really lucky too. I have a good friend who wrote her doctoral dissertation on a plant medicine. Oh, wow. And so I actually read most of her dissertation. Most of it was over my head, but it was really great that I had her as a reference point. Mm-hmm. And so she was able to kind of give me some more pointers and point me in some of the directions. I read some things on maps and some other places, but you can't be prepared. Sure. Yeah. And there are a lot of things that I've learned now that, looking back at some of my previous experiences, like, man, I could have gotten so much more out of that. But one of the biggest things for me was I planned it for my first experience, and my first experience wasn't technically a plant medicine. It was LSD. And I meditated about it. I prayed about it. I set my intention. And this is actually a mistake that I made that I think is kind of funny. I wasn't trusting the medicine enough. Mm-hmm. And I also chose to send Reiki to the moment of taking it for 30 days. So I had a 30-day practice beforehand, tuning into my listening to it, and sending Reiki. Mm-hmm. And so then I had an experience during my journey where I laid down and I was like, okay, I'm ready to now receive the 30 days of Reiki. That was too much. That was way too much. I would not recommend that. I do recommend doing little bits, but that it was honestly, it was too much, and it almost kind of ripped me open. Yeah. Which is funny that this is, broken open, but it really was it kind of burst the doors open in almost too extreme of a way, because at that moment I received so much love, mm-hmm. but that trauma background within me, mm-hmm. that's not safe. It's not safe to feel that amount of love. It's not safe to feel everything. And so I freaked out a bit. I was able to, use my grounding skills, and I had a sitter, and it was all exactly how it was supposed to be. But I never would have expected that some healing tools can be too much. And I've had that experience since then too, where I've had crystals with me on a journey, and then I'm like, whoa, okay, too much. Yeah. And so sometimes we can almost overplan. And I've had many, many more experiences, and some I go in with a super clear intention and a goal, and I let my sitter know everything. Other times I'm like, okay, I'm ready for the medicine to just show me what I need. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And for those of you, just so you kind of have a context for what we're talking about, plant medicine journeys, they can range a little bit as far as your environment. So, and also, of course, obviously the plant medicine that you are working with. So, for some people, there are therapists, psychiatrists that work with, I think mostly psychiatrists are working with DMT, which I think a DMT is what's present in ayahuasca.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can work with it in a kind of a clinical environment, supervised by a psychiatrist, using something like DMT, which, like we said, is what's present in ayahuasca. There are ayahuasca journeys where you are with a group of other people. Sometimes there are opportunities to do them privately as well with a facilitator. And you drink a tea and you stay on a mat. There may be purging involved, and we can talk a little bit about that, because I know for a lot of people that's and that was I was I was that person for a long time. That was something that was very much kind of, it held me back. I was afraid of that. But there can be purging with ayahuasca, but you just kind of stay on your mat and you write it out, and you don't talk to anybody else. You don't interact with anybody else. It's kind of a very controlled environment. And then, I've done journeys where they are facilitated by groups of people and actually, it's funny, the shaman that I met in Los Angeles, had that experience with him. It just absolutely, it opened me up in such a way. And not even so much, from a psychedelic experience standpoint, but it gave me a vocabulary that I didn't have before. It helped me understand, the plant medicine I worked with in that situation was something that was, very, very mildly psychedelic. They start you out very slowly. It's very mild, and they call it heart. And what it does is it just it allows you to drop down into your heart space. And for somebody with trauma, it's a really difficult, if not impossible, thing to do. So it was the first time I'd had that experience since I was little, of just being able to be down in my heart space and be fully present. And so, I wanted to, it was such an incredibly opening and just life-changing experience. I wanted that again. And I wanted to find, the people that worked with this particular shaman and had trained through him. And I tried to look online, and there were like no leads. I couldn't find anything. Came to Louisville, and happened to was taking a class, and the facilitator of that class, it was like a 2-day weekend thing about Akashic records, and we were like on break, and people are going to the bathroom, getting snacks and talking, and it was like all of a sudden the noise just shifted in just the right way, and I heard her in the other room talking to somebody, saying, "Yeah, I do plant medicine journeys with," and she named him. She just said his first name, and immediately I was like, "Oh my God,
Oh,
I need to talk to you." So it was, so they, my experience was with this group that was trained with this one particular shaman, and he, it's a variety of plant medicines, and he grows his own blends, and they're all very carefully cultivated and curated, and you're in this kind of group experience, and it's a very well held, loving container, and you can interact if you want to. You don't have to, but they hold you in such a way so that, especially somebody walking in that's dealing with trauma, feels held and supported as they're going through and doing the work they need to do. So, and that's, you can be on a mat, you can be outside, you can, move around, you can do whatever you want to do. So there are different kinds of formats for people to experience plant medicine. And those are some of the ways. Have you experienced anything different, or is that?
Yeah, I loved hearing that. Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing. And I've had a variety of experiences. It's interesting. My first experience that I just shared about was at my home, and that was what I needed to feel safe. And I mean, it was ridiculous, my list of things to feel safe, but that was kind of my normal. I knew that at the time I was having PTSD, like dissociative flashbacks, where I would be nonverbal. So everywhere I went, I always had a piece of paper with emergency contacts and what to do and what not to do, because most of the time I was able to get that out. So I had everything so planned for that experience at home. And when I started looking into ayahuasca, oh man, she called me. You might hear us talk about, if people aren't familiar, like the medicine needs to call you. Like, it's not something that you hear someone say and it's like, oh, I should do that. Yeah, I should do that. I should put that on my list and do it. Like, for me, at least, I really had to wait for the call. I had to wait for the medicine to call me. And when Aya called to me, I had to find a way. And when I started looking into it, I was really disappointed because my gut was telling me so strongly to not do a group.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a life or death, no, do not do a group type of thing. And I was so frustrated because I wanted to, and I had heard these great testimonials, and
Right.
I had met the people that were going to be holding it, and I trusted them, but I chose to not do a group. So my husband and I went and we did a private ceremony, which was tougher to make happen. You can imagine, it was more expensive, but it was exactly what I needed because we had, the mat, and we actually were in a cabin to where we had a bed, we had nature. And that's what I needed for that experience. I was really concerned, and I think that it was probably these specific space holders maybe wouldn't have been capable of helping me protect my own space. And so I still trust that was the right decision for me. And since then, I have had group experiences that, I mean, are just the most healing thing ever. And you can go and be on your mat or do your own thing. Every container has a different expectation. So it's so important to, find out ahead of time so that you know what to expect.
Right.
And so that you can, be sure with the trauma background that you have everything you need to feel safe and comfortable.
Absolutely. Yep.
But I've definitely had group experiences where, I had one where there was a gentleman there that was almost like a stand-in of my father, and I was a stand-in of his daughter. And it, like, the parallels in our actual lives was absolutely uncanny.
Yeah.
Like, I have full children. Like, it was unreal. And then I've also had group experiences where I love seeing what's going on with others and their journey and their experience. But it's almost like the medicine has also taught me how to set up energetic boundaries, because there were times where I was in that space and I was able to be in my own healing and my own experience, but also watch others with a healthy level of disconnection and a healthy level of connection. So like a detachment from their experience and letting them have it, but also a connection and a deep love with everybody there and with their experience. And it really was like the medicine taught me a lot more about my own energetic boundaries and being responsible for my own energy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Have you always just worked with Aya, or have you worked with different things?
I've worked with different things as well.
Awesome. Which I think is, and I know for myself, has been important because, each plant works in your system a little bit differently. And, Mama Aya is ayahuasca can be, it can take you in a much different direction than something like psilocybin mushrooms or something like, and it's not really a plant medicine, but like toad is something that a lot of people will experience in what's called ceremony or journey experience or space. So it's nice to be able to work with a variety of things because they do give you different experiences. And I do think, that what you said about energetic boundaries is something that's so important, because especially stepping into a group space and with somebody with a trauma background, I know many of us that hold trauma, get into this place of, a safety mechanism, that we've learned is people pleasing. And so stepping into a group environment, especially where, you don't, because often you're stepping into a group of people that you may not know, except the facilitators. And so, it becomes very easy to get pulled into that pattern. So I think, being very aware of your needs, of your boundaries is really, really important. And like you said, finding a facilitator that you connect with, you get really good information about the kind of space that they hold, they're trauma informed, and that they're going to support you in a way that you need to be supported is massive. So, but knowing your boundaries, that's such a good point. That's huge.
Yeah. I actually had an experience with a facilitator once with Toad DMT, 5-MeO DMT. And it was another one of those things that it called to me. I needed to go. And I think it was it was on me that I was a bit too aggressive of wanting to go. And because of that, and because of the rarity of the opportunity, I didn't listen to myself that it wasn't the right thing for me at that time. And my husband went with me and he wasn't comfortable either. And we still, I still proceeded with it. And nothing terrible happened, but it was not a safe space. And one of the lessons that I learned from that I'd love to share is be sure that you talk to the facilitator. Sometimes, I run a business. I know how businesses work of having the right system, but you have to talk to the facilitator. Absolutely. You can't just go through this person, and I've worked with them for this many years or done this many journeys, because this facilitator, his ego was very, very, very much in the way. And he did what I now refer to as like pushing me through the door of healing, instead of letting me kind of work through it. And that unfortunately caused some like spiritual scar tissue, essentially. Sure. And I had to relearn how to trust myself and how to trust the journey of finding the right practitioner and when to use it, and how to trust myself to get out of situations that weren't right. And I'm lucky that nothing, terrible happened, because I didn't listen to that little voice saying, it doesn't matter that you drove X number of hours and paid X amount of money. Yeah. Oh, like if you get to a situation and you're not feeling safe, you have to trust yourself, and you have to be prepared to wash your hands of any time and financial investment for your own safety. And trust that.
1,000%. I think that's such an important thing. It's, and I think that's one of the things for me that, my working with plant medicine was able to help me connect so much more deeply with my own inner knowing, that I was able to develop that relationship. I because of that just amazing serendipity and finding, a group here locally, and it was somebody that I had worked, the facilitator was somebody I had worked with in another capacity and I trusted very much. I got really, really lucky. But it is something where, really touching into that deep knowing is so important. And, when it doesn't feel right, listening to that, it's, there's always going to be other opportunities. But, making sure that you feel safe is, especially going in, working through a trauma piece, is massive. And I will say this too, Liz, you mentioned, speaking, having conversation and connecting with your facilitators. I think one of the things that is really important too is that, certain medications don't work well with plant medicine. Everything from, anti-anxiety and depression medication can have a problem, even down to certain pain medications like tramadol. So it's really important you work with a facilitator that understands that and has a conversation with you about your health and about the medications that you may be on, so you're not sitting in a situation that may be potentially a health risk.
Yeah. And I'll actually add in a piece that kind of ties into that as well, that I've chosen to do in the last year, is I am letting all of my medical professionals know that I also use plant medicine. And that was really, really risky for me, because I actually have some medical trauma. And so that to me was really, really, really scary. But when I looked at kind of a bit of like almost regret that the transformation that I've had, the healing that I've had, isn't documented. And I want this to be documented. I want to remove the stigma, which is why we're talking, and people are interested. And I want doctors to hear about that and to hear about the benefits of it. So I made sure when I was going through all of my journeys and working with the therapist, I let her know about it, and I pointed her to resources that she wasn't very familiar. And I'm actually in a medical process right now. And I've had to remind them to put it on my chart, because I put it on all of my medical history, and I want my doctors to know, because if there's going to be any interaction with the medication, I want to know that. Absolutely. And I even signed off on the waiver. I'm getting a colonoscopy in a couple days. And I even signed off on like the waiver of that, put in the dates that I've used substances and that they could share those records with others. Because if that's something that's going on with my gut because of plant medicine, I want that to be documented, because I want there to be able to be scientific studies. I want this to be available to everybody that is looking for it. Yeah. And in a safe way, because unfortunately, you don't always get great facilitators.
Yeah.
If it has to be under the radar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's having that conversation with your facilitators is, it's like you mentioned, I mean, it is really just about making sure that you understand your specific needs. And I think, for myself, I'll speak only for myself here, but I know that I need to push myself a little bit. So, even in the plant medicine, I've had the biggest breakthroughs when I've relaxed enough, in spaces, not in spaces, but where I was perhaps a little bit, what's the word I want to use? I don't know. I was pushing myself a little bit past my retracted comfort zone. And that's something that works for me, but doesn't work for everybody. And knowing that about yourself is really important and very, very okay. I walked into a journey with a facilitator that had been a teacher of mine over several months prior, and I had done journey work with her one-on-one as well. And I walked into a group journey experience. And I was walking in, I have sexual trauma, and I didn't know, I knew it was going to be just women, which seemed great, but I didn't know that there was going to be, that there wasn't anybody. Well, I take that back. There was, people walking around without their clothes on, which is totally fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. I think it's amazing. And, having the opportunity to explore that in journey space can be magical and so healing. However, when you're walking into a space like that, having experienced any kind of sexual trauma, that's something you want to know ahead of time. And I didn't know that. And there was a couple other things that went on in that space. And it was the hardest journey I have ever had, and one of the best journeys I have ever had, all in the same experience. And it taught me so much about what's important in a journey space, and knowing your boundaries and knowing what you need is first and foremost important. Making sure you have the right support. I was in, again, the same journey group experience. I think there were 12 or 13 people in the group with two facilitators. One was not in the medicine, and one I think fully was. And some journeys are very gentle and beautiful and graceful and soft and so lovely. This one, going into the medicine, and I was really only working with psilocybin mushrooms. Like, going in, it was just all knees and elbows all the way in. It was just so uncomfortable. And then I dropped into this place of the deepest despair I've ever felt in my entire life. I mean, just cracked wide open. And all of the things, like the most painful things with relationships, were all right there. And I was sitting there, and and of course, tears are to be expected, I think, for anybody going into journey. Happy tears, sometimes sad tears, sometimes all of the above. I mean, you can go through the whole gamut of emotions. But I was in such deep despair, and there was nobody there that could really be with me. Like, the facilitators weren't really aware of where I was, and I was in such a dark space in that moment. And when you're working, when you're in a safe space, they should be aware of where all their people are. They should be able to at least get a bead on you as to what's going on. And I was completely missed. And so it turned out to be a gloriously beautiful experience. I'm extraordinarily grateful to have had it, but there were moments there that were really, really difficult. And so I had to learn about.
Did it feel like you had, because with the trauma history, you know how to hide things
Mm-hmm.
and how to put off whatever anyone needs to see by
Mm-hmm.
your standard? Do you think that it was because of that, or do you think that it was because there were just a lot of people and it just happened to be that you were kind of missed? Or do you feel like you were kind of trying to keep your experience under wraps from others?
I think, and that's a great question. I think that there's probably a little bit of all of the above going on, because of my trauma. I know very well how I'm a great container. I can hold it all. I can carry it all very, very well, and not really allow it to affect anybody outside of me. But in speaking with people that were in the circle that evening, that saw me, they knew that I was in this deep space, and one actually walked over and was able to help me pass through it in the most amazing way. She was just an absolute angel in skin that helped me to kind of, it was literally, and I think this is, we talk about spiritual death. I think, that is something that is very possible to experience in plant medicine state. And it sounds very scary. But I think, when we're going through something, especially a healing cycle, sometimes we have to let things drop. We have to release them. And it's like a death. It's like our old identity dies and falls away. And then this new phase, this new part of ourselves, this new way of walking in the world kind of emerges out of that. But they were able to help me work through it, and it turned out to be amazing. But it was such an incredible experience about my ability to ask for help.
Yeah.
As well as knowing and making sure that being much more aware of what my trauma needs are in that scenario, and knowing to ask before going in, what kind of environment that I'm walking into, because I took a lot of things for granted.
Yeah.
I learned.
And how many journeys in was that for you? Was that one of your first?
No, I've been journeying. It was my, so I have been doing most of my journey work with this same group of facilitators that I connected to out in Los Angeles. And they've been my primary group. Different iterations of that group is where I've been. And so I did a private, and then I did, this is my first group journey with this facilitator.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of learning and a lot of growing that night.
What was your integration like after that journey, or journeys in general? What have you learned about the integration process?
That's such a great question, because I think that is as important as the journey experience itself. I got really spoiled. As part of that training that this group of facilitators goes through is learning, how to hold integration. And basically, all of that really means is allowing you to kind of ground in and touch into, what your takeaways are, making sure that, you are in an okay space emotionally, physically, all of the things, and you're walking out the door after that experience okay. And then, I've had a journey where I paid a lot of money for it. and the morning after, trying to share my experience, they looked at me like I had lobsters crawling out of my ears. And it was a massive journey. I was working with ayahuasca a little bit, and not the tea form, it was in a paste form. And so I, had this just massive experience with that medicine. and needed to integrate the next morning. I mean, you know, when I was able to see myself in the mirror, the first thing right before I went to bed, I looked like I had been maced because I had been crying so much that my, you know, and it's just part of processing, but you know, and so the next morning, like trying to share what my experience was and go through that integration process. And it kind of looked at me like that was nuts for, you know, like, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, okay, maybe this isn't the right space for me.
Were you able to find someone different to help you with integration, a friend, therapist, another facilitator or holder of medicine that was able to help you integrate?
I didn't. And that I think is a really good point. At that point, I've been doing plant medicine ceremonies for quite a while. So I had good legs. And so I was able to walk myself through that process. And, but, you know, I think that's a really good point too, that, you know, knowing that you've got places to tap into after the fact, if you need to, like a therapist or a good support group or support network, whether it's friends or whatever, that can support you after the fact is, you know, that's crucial too.
Yeah. Yeah. I found that, now I think that my range has been widened a little bit of who my support system can be, but I had my therapist who was not familiar with it. And then after I did some group journey work, I needed some integration, like long-term integration. It was about a year of processing for this one journey. And I'm really, really thankful that I had that experience of her holding space so well for me in the journey, that afterwards, when I knew that I needed more support, it was a week or two later and we checked in and I was like, yeah, this is kind of what's going on. And I can't remember if I specifically asked or if she invited me, but I knew that she also offered, you know, extra integration support. And that to me was huge because she had a deeper understanding of it. And in previous containers, yes, there was a ton of healing that was able to happen still and help with the integration, but it had to be a bit more of like a self-led integration if they weren't familiar with the medicine. But working with someone who had not only worked with that specific medicine, but seen me on the journey and been with me there. Oh my gosh. Like, that year of integration was crucial. And it was a solid year. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you bring a good point there, you know, that the integration process is, you know, even if you have a facility, if you found a facilitator that's great with, you know, the integration process, you know, even the next morning or, you know, after the fact, you have the ability to work with them a little bit, you know, there's still that, you know, personal integration process. And it can, you know, it can be something that unfolds over the course of a couple of weeks to a couple of months to, for big journeys when you get those big pieces that drop in. It's, you know, giving yourself time to be with that, I think is really, really important. It's such a beautiful, beautiful process.
Yeah.
It's, giving yourself that time is really critical too.
Yeah.
So what is, you know, as far as being in, you know, working with plant medicine, how did your relationship or what did you learn? How did your view of your trauma shift from the time you walked into after you started working with plant medicine?
I will preface this with, this is my journey and this is not projecting onto anyone else what their journey in life and their trauma is. For me, I'm able to look at most of my experiences with love.
Yeah.
And this can be triggering to say. And so I'm very, very cautious with how I say this because the emotion shows through. But I have such deep love for everyone that was involved in things that caused many, many years of devastation in my life. And plant medicine was able to give me the freedom from my PTSD symptoms enough that I was able to do other types of healing work for myself. And through that, I was able to completely change the relationship that I had with everybody in my life. And the relationship, you know, spiritual, emotional relationship, not in human form, relationship with previous abusers.
Yeah.
And it really was able to transmute everything to a healing experience.
Yeah.
Even when I look back at the traumas themselves. And that to me is, I'm very cautious with how I say that, because I don't want that to ignore that was a true trauma. And I don't want that to say like, it's okay to do these things.
Right.
But at the same time, I had the experience of like the oneness of we are all one. And for me, it was really, really deep shadow work of like, I am you, you are me. We're all one. How can I have compassion? Like the deepest level of compassion that I don't even feel like there's a word for. How can I have that for the people that hurt me, the people that stood by while I was being hurt? Poor little Liz, and like have compassion for what she was going through and transmute everything into peace. I don't even, maybe love isn't the right word, but peace.
Yeah.
I don't remember what your exact question was, but
no. I'm actually just sitting with that. That's that's amazing. And I think that really does speak to one of the beautiful powers of working with plant medicine. And I will say one of the things that just, it awes me every single time is how intelligent this medicine is. And it doesn't matter what plant you're working with, even working with cannabis. Cannabis is still plant medicine. And even working with cannabis, if you're doing it therapeutically, it's so intelligent, and it has this way of giving you what you need. May not always be what you want. And as I mentioned before, it may not always be the most pleasant experience, but I have learned for myself that sometimes even the most, in that space, sometimes even the most unpleasant experiences can still turn into just absolute awe-inspiring beauty. That's so healing. It's I learned, I think for me, I grew up in an environment. I was an only child, and we moved a lot. So I was kind of isolated. And, I developed this amazing ability to, take care of myself emotionally, because there was no, I had all of my other needs beautifully taken care of, except for the emotional piece. And so I, was starting to experience things and realizing that I wasn't fine, that I needed help as a child, and was continuously told, no, you're fine. No, you're fine. No, you're fine. And so I was kind of walking around in the world with this, I don't know, it's just, there was a break. There was a piece of me inside that was screaming, there's something going on that needs attention, not okay. While my logical mind, because it had been programmed, was kind of on this loop of, oh, you're fine. Oh, you're just being silly. Oh, you're fine. And so stepping into that place, that medicine space, because one of the things that it does do so frequently is allow you, trauma, I think it's a Gabor Mate, and I'm paraphrasing here. He's a physician that's done a lot of work around addiction and done a lot of research on trauma and its effects on the body. And he defines trauma basically as, the self being constricted and, not being able to be your full self, that, in present moments, your true self has to be constricted in order to be safe. And so that's what he defines as the effects of trauma, or what trauma is in the body. And so stepping into plant medicine space is the first time that I realized, I was able to be present, because that's something that I was not able to be. And I didn't know that until I was in that space and I was able to experience it so fully for the first time. And it was just like light bulbs everywhere, like, oh my God. this is what it feels like to be in my heart space. And, it was, it helped me to understand, what the breaks were, where the breaks were, and touch into that presence, that heart space. Was also, I think, it sounds it sounds so crazy to pick your favorite journey, because they're all so amazing. But there was one that was so profound. It was the first time in my life that I was able to fully feel what it was like to be perfectly, truly, wholly loved. And it became such a touchstone. Just having that knowledge in my system, having that experience has impacted and affected every step I've taken from that moment forward. And so those are the kinds of things that plant medicine has given me: a greater vocabulary, a greater understanding, a greater way of, you know, talking to my trauma, talking to the pieces of, the way that we hold the energy in our body, and being able to identify, where I have tension and what is that, and feeling resistance. I have been carrying so much resistance and I had no idea. So being, this incredible awareness that I didn't have before, that that was the gift that it is given and given again many times over.
Yeah, I can feel that very deeply. And I love that, I think that's really funny that you mentioned like pick your favorite journey, and you can't really pick it. But yeah. As you were sharing that, it was getting me thinking about, I questioned when I was healing through journey work. It made me question, does everybody feel this? Like, was I not feeling these things because of my trauma? Or was I not feeling these things because I hadn't had this spiritual experience with the aid of the medicine? And that still is kind of a question that we'll never know, because we'll never be in anyone else's exact, form.
Right.
But have you ever considered that, or what does that bring up for you?
Say that one more time. Let me.
Yeah, so, I questioned whether what I felt after journey work and through journey work was the release of the trauma residue, bringing me back to a wholeness as a human, or was it bringing me back to a wholeness as a human spirit because of the medicine? Or was that a piece that, trauma was released and most people feel this way, and I didn't know that most people feel this way because I had this trauma that I was carrying around.
Right. And that's kind of, I think, really, that's one of the things that it has given me, is this understanding of, like I said, this is what it feels like to be loved, to be able to feel love. This is what it feels like to be present in my own body and to feel safety in my own body. Just my ability to reacquaint not only, my emotional body, but my physical body. They talk about dysregulation of the vagal nerve, of that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. That is what, when we have flashbacks and when we have PTSD, that's what's going on. And so the ability to calm that, so I could be safe, to be able to reintroduce the concept of safety into my body and heart and spirit, is miraculous. To be able to touch into that normalcy, because it's something, because my symptoms started so young. I really didn't know anything different until the medicine. And so, I think one of the things for me is it has introduced truth, kind of an emotional truth, about, it's introduced me to my own personal truth, my own authenticity, which, for somebody that has PTSD and is dealing with trauma, we learn how to survive in a way where our truth is so tightly packaged and contained that many people, aren't ever able to really access it. So having that experience, it's just been, it's everything. It's absolutely.
I almost feel like trauma had been this like boulder that I was tied to, and I would only get so far away from it
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, like, it's like this story of, I think this just came to me, like the story of like the elephant that, like, you know, it's just tied by a rope from infancy. And by the time that it's an adult, like, it just doesn't try to break free. And I feel like plant medicine was able to teach me that, like, oh, you're not tied to that anymore. Like, that, you can try to carry that if you want, but you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember after my first experience therapeutically, it was many days later, and all of a sudden, like, have the vivid memory of like wind knocked out of me almost, of like, oh my gosh, I haven't had a flashback in days.
Yeah.
Wow, if I don't have to stay that close to my trauma to figure out like how to manage my dissociative flashbacks, where I would literally like try to run into traffic, like away from no one that was there.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't have to do that, like, oh my gosh, I could have a life. I could actually live a normal life. I could actually figure out who I am and be something other than my trauma. And I remember like that light switch when I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize until that moment how much of my life had been totally consumed, totally consumed by my trauma.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, like, immediately I was free, and I was like, whoa.
Uh-huh.
And then came kind of the freak out of, shit, what do I do with this?
Right. How do I do this? What do I do now?
My life is built around my trauma. And so,
Right.
and you know, that happens a lot with people on their healing journey of like, once everything's possible. And I think that can happen too, with not only once we're free from our trauma, but once we start to see and feel worthy of accepting that love that's always there.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can almost feel lonely. It's like you want to go up to everybody and be like, shaking them, like, do you feel this? Like,
right. Did you know this is possible?
Yeah, like, because I didn't, like,
no idea.
Everything worked out exactly how it was supposed to, but there's still a part of me that, like, is still a part of me that aches for like the pain that I went through for so long. And
but it is so funny because that's such a bizarre side effect that I never would have imagined, because you know my anxiety has calmed down. I haven't been, and again, this is me just speaking for me, since I had that cross-country trip where I had to detox all those meds, I haven't been on meds since. So that was 2012. So 9 years. But I still had to manage my anxiety. And I've, through some shamanic work, some other types of shamanic work, as well as plant medicine, I've gotten to a point where, in really over just the last year, this last year has been so crazy, but it created this beautiful little cocoon for me to really dive in and do some deep work. And I'm in the place now where I am not experiencing anxiety every moment of every day. And there have been moments where it's like, I don't feel my anxiety anymore, but I had to relearn how to function without it. I had to relearn. I mean, it sounds weird that I missed it. It's not really a missing it, but it's like, the only thing I can think of is, if you've got an injury that you are compensating for, let's say that you are limping to compensate for a twisted ankle, and you do that so often, when that ankle heals, getting back into the rhythm of a normal gait is going to feel really weird for a little while. And so I'm kind of in that space, and I'm excited about it. It's so exciting, but it's so weird to have that anxiety that I've been carrying with me since, I don't know, I was 7 years old, with me every day in every social interaction, to have that start to erode and fade is just, it's amazing. But it is relearning a lot of things, because I think one of the things with trauma is that, we develop coping mechanisms. And some of them can look like addiction and things that are really unhealthy. Some of them can be, more healthy kinds of coping mechanisms, but you're still having to find a way to work around this thing that you are carrying and still go to work and pay the bills and feed yourself and do all the things. And so when that thing is gone, or starts to get smaller in significant ways, it's like, holy cow. what do I do now?
Yeah. I mean, it becomes so much of our identity.
Mhm.
And it can also be a challenge for other people to figure out how to then interact with this different version of us.
Yes.
I noticed that instead of putting on the mask of like, I'm okay,
Mhm.
I started almost putting on the mask of like, inside I was okay, but I felt like I needed to put on the mask of, I'm not okay, the world's terrible, otherwise like I'm not safe. And like I had to kind of readjust what I was letting the world see of me, because I think part of it was that I still felt so tender and vulnerable because I discovered this innocence and this peace within me, and like I wanted to protect that.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of kind of relearning with close relationships in my life of, okay, how do we now develop, especially when a big part of our relationship was my trauma,
Mm-hmm.
what do we do now?
Yeah.
So
And I think that's a really important point, because when you go through the healing process and, especially with plant medicine, because, it really is. And I've heard so many people say this, and it is the God's honest truth. It is like 10 years of therapy in a single 8-hour time frame. So, when you go through that kind of healing, and you start to walk in the world differently, you just start holding yourself differently. You feel more present. You feel more, able to be authentic. You start to notice the life that for me, I started noticing the life that I had built around me, and how my trauma had impacted, everything. And one of the, like for me, one of the big things that I've learned is my relationships. I was patterning my relationships over, the course of my entire life, over, patterning it after the relationship, my first relationships with my family, my parents, because that's what I knew, and that's what was home. Even though home was, and these are people that I love dearly, but home was toxic for me. It wasn't safe. So I went out in the world and I created little homes all over the place, in my job and in my relationships, which was other little places where I wasn't emotionally safe. And so, going through that process, starting to heal, started to help me wake up to that. And then you're in that place where, you have to learn how to renegotiate relationships, and sometimes, release relationships or jobs or, places where you're living, because they just don't fit anymore.
yeah, and that can be scary, going into a journey with that thought of, oh my gosh, I might have a breakthrough that I need, but what if that costs me this relationship or that job or this friend group?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a level of surrender that, oh, I mean, every time I'm like,
Every time. Yeah.
okay.
Yep. Yeah, it really, really is. And I think, surrender is a perfect word, because it is, I've noticed that resistance, when plant medicine is working with you to show you something, to reveal something, resistance can be very uncomfortable. And so, learning to surrender and learning to float and just be present with it is huge. And then of course there's the surrendering to after the fact, and all of the changes, because it really is, I found myself over the course of several years kind of feeling like I'm in this weird kind of straddling place where I am, there's people that I love that I'm working hard to maintain relationships with that don't really fit anymore, and I'm trying to grow into this healed version of myself. And I know there's going to be, there with some of these things, there's going to be a point where choices are going to have to be made, whether I keep myself small to maintain the relationship, or I'll surrender to the healing and allow myself to step forward into whatever's next.
Yeah.
It can be scary.
Yeah, it's scary. A lot of crossroads like that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. let me glance down. I know that we've just been talking. We've got a couple of folks that have shouted out at us. We've got Wolf Clark that says hello, and Jenny Townsend is with us, as is, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, Kanithia.
Yep.
Shalom. Awesome. She's with us as well. So thank you guys so much for being here. Remember, if you have any questions here, just to drop them in really quickly, and we'll take a second here and see if we can't answer those for you. But I feel like this is something that we could talk about forever.
Absolutely.
And go ahead.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I sat down, like, was grounding myself before this and like made a list, and I was like, whoa, there's a lot of important aspects and things that have happened, like, which was really nice, because I feel like that connected me back with those experiences and kind of back with the medicine. And the medicine will continue working with you after consuming it, as well as before. And that's one of the tips that, I want to give as well as an invitation is, you don't have to work with the actual substance. Yes, that is one experience, 100%. And there are health benefits to that, depending on what the substance is as well. And you can also ask that substance, medicine, to work with you. And you can carve out time and hold a reverence for it and work with that medicine beforehand, especially when you're deciding if it's the right medicine, if it's the right time, spending time like dating it, essentially.
Yeah.
And
beautiful.
And I think that's sometimes overlooked. And I've done quite a bit of work with the medicines I've worked with, not ingesting the actual substance. Mm-hmm. And it's a different experience, definitely. But I've also had experiences, breath work is one of the other things that I recommend people do if they're interested in plant medicine, because it can be a very similar experience, especially if your brain can release DMT. And I've had experiences where for a while, Mother Io was with me in breathworks, and it was a 1 or 1.5 hour breathwork session. I could have sworn it was 8 hours. No joke. Aya came in and she did some hard work with me, and it felt like an entire day long journey.
Yeah.
And so don't discredit, I want to give people that invitation, because you have to wait until the medicine calls you. You have to wait until the right time and until you feel safe and comfortable with all of those things that we've talked about. And that doesn't mean that you have to wait until you have a substance in your hand. You can start doing this work, just tuning into the energy of it.
Absolutely. I think that's beautiful. And something that, I've worked with the medicine after the fact, because, our bodies have this incredible, memory. They hold that. And so tapping back into those moments and tapping back into that medicine, like you said, you're never fully in the medicine unless you're in the medicine, but and your body remembers. So, but sitting with it beforehand, and I like how you said that, like courting it beforehand that's really beautiful. I look forward to trying that and working with it that way. That's powerful. One of the other things that we didn't really talk about, but I just want to kind of mention too, not every type of plant medicine that you work with, or you have the ability to work with is, an illegal substance or is psychedelic. For instance, cacao. There's a lot of people that are working with cacao. Yeah. And it's amazing. Talk about dropping you down into your heart space, opening up that heart. Yeah.
Cacao is something that I've been working with for about a year now. And I actually sell cacao through, it's a company called Firefly, ceremonial. I'm going to drop that. And I like saying who they're through, because I found that it's such a great product and company, but it's ceremonial-cacao.com. The company is Firefly, and I sell their cacao. So I resell it. I'm a distributor with them, only for local Louisville folks. But exactly what you said, it drops you into your heart. Cacao is one of the medicines that it's not psychedelic, but it has been so powerful for me, because it's unlike anything else, because I feel like it grounds me down so deeply while connecting me to source, like it's such an expansive, expansive medicine.
Yeah.
And yeah. And just like we talked about, like waiting until we feel called to things. I've been wanting to hold cacao circles, and I keep communing with her, and I have many different types from that company that are all very different as well. And it's still not my time to hold circles, other than I've done a few individual groups. And I think that that's one of those things that, like, there's such deep wisdom that she'll let you know when you're supposed to do something different. Absolutely. And I'm working with her on almost a daily basis, and so incredibly powerful, but not psychedelic. And that's a great place to start. Another one that I think is, it's not psychedelic, it is harsh, and I'm not positive about its legality, is Kambo. Have you ever worked with, it's Kambo?
No, I haven't worked with Kambo before.
Okay. Yeah, that's another one that is getting a lot of popularity now, that I've been trying to figure out the ethics of it, because it's from a frog, and that's really important, is how the medicines are sourced.
Absolutely. Yes.
And we never know for sure. That's one of the tough things of, that's an aspect of surrender, is we'll never fully know if the way that the medicine was sourced is ethical. Do you have any, I didn't mean to like interject with cacao. Are there others that you wanted to chat about?
Cacao is really the big one that comes to mind, because it is not psychedelic. It is entirely legal. It is easy to get. And I think it's important to make sure that you're getting it from a good source, and somebody that is sourcing it, thoughtfully and responsibly. But beyond that, it's definitely a great one to work with, because it does have such incredible healing power. But it is insanely accessible compared to almost everything else that we've talked about.
Yeah. One of the, I love cacao. My husband and I were actually even considering buying land in Belize, and potentially growing cacao. And we stayed with the 3rd generation cacao farmer there, and hearing his stories of it was amazing. And it was heartbreaking hearing some of the recent issues with companies coming in and child labor, and just some really icky stuff going on. But one of the things that has really amazed me with cacao is that cacao plants, and I can't totally vouch for this because I haven't seen it happen, but cacao plants will pop up in places that need it. The plant will just grow. Yeah. And it'll just come up, which I just, man, yeah, cacao is that same level of like nurturing mother, like mother, grandmother energy that just, it's just like your little baby being held at times. It is just this like all encompassing swimming in love.
Yeah. And when it comes to healing, especially with trauma, that being held is it's so powerful. It's so powerful. So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. If you do your cacao ceremonies, your cacao circle, please let us know.
I will. Yeah, I'm waiting. I think that what I'm probably going to do first is like a self-guided exploration for people, because for whatever reason, I'll keep you updated, but
please, yeah.
Space holding is so important. And you have to have a certain amount of work with the medicine and with space holding. And logically, when I think about it, I've got those. Yeah, I've got them. Like, I've been working with the medicine almost daily for about a year, different types and in different ways. And I'm great with healing. I'm great with space holding. Yet my gut and cacao tells me not yet. And, even something like a cacao ceremony, just because it's not psychedelic, the same thing applies when you're entering into something with a healing intention. Be sure that your spirit is telling you to go, that it's not just like, oh yeah, I'm available that day. Sure, I'll meet you there.
Right.
Respect the medicine.
Respect the medicine. I think that, it's so important across the board, for so many reasons, but that's how and it really is. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you are sitting, who you are with, doesn't matter. What matters is the relationship, the communication between you and the medicine. And if you go in a way where you're not in integrity with it, which I mean, ultimately means you're not in integrity with yourself and how you're being called and how you're being guided, and, you know, making sure you understand where your boundaries are, finding your no in case you need it, finding your yes in case you need that too. And being, you know, being in that, you know, respectful, honoring place for yourself and the medicine is really key. It's kind of everything.
Yeah, it is.
Awesome. I'm going to glance really quickly.
Yeah.
We do have, well, so thank you so much for sharing your experiences to both of us. And then Kanithia asked, what is Kava?
Kava. Did we mention Kava?
Oh, you know what? I think maybe it's funny. I was thinking Kava and you said combo. That's hysterical.
Okay.
I am almost positive that my first experience was a blend that included Kava. Don't quote me on this. If it is the plant that I'm thinking of, it has a very mild stimulant in it, but it also has a very, very mild psychedelic in there. So it is, it's also a beautiful way to start working with plant medicine too. I am not sure about the legal part of it though.
No, and I even on my other screen just pulled it up real quick. Yeah, Kava it's legal. I was like, I have Kava tea.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is legal. I mean, Louisville Tea Company has it, Vitamin Shop in Louisville.
No, and maybe I need to go look too, because it's been so long since because I think there's a couple that are close. Like, is it Kana that I'm thinking
Oh
of?
my gosh, I'm right there with you. What is it?
Between combo and Kava, it's like right in there too, and then my brain's just not.
Yeah, it's so close. It's like right at the tip of my tongue, but yeah, there are, and the one that I think we're trying to mention can be really good for focus and for pain and for addiction as well. For opioid addiction, I know it's been an alternative. Kana? I don't know.
Something with a hard K sound is.
Yeah. Someone else says, is it that? Yeah, so I'm not familiar with those. I don't have personal experience.
I'll have to go to the Googles and see if I can figure out what I'm thinking of. But yeah, now I'm curious myself.
I know. Yeah. So
we will have to try. Thank you so much for being here, and I will open the door. This doesn't have to be the last conversation we have about this. It doesn't have to be even about this. We can talk about whatever. I would love to have you back at any point to talk about the work that you're doing, and you know, help connect people with you. Remember that Liz's her contact details are in the description. So if you would like to reach out to Liz to find out how to work with her one-on-one, definitely check there. If you have any questions about working with plant medicine, both she and I are available for conversation. We both have resources and can help point you in a good, solid, safe direction. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you guys so much for being here. And we will see you very soon. Much, much love. Thank you, Liz.
Bye. Thank you.